And welcome to another edition of Believe in Saints. I am David Grubb. He is Terrence Copper. And certainly we have something significant to discuss today, sir.
Yes, we do.
The Saints have their guy. They have signed quarterback Derek Carr to a 4-year, $150 million deal, $100 million in guaranteed money. First, I want to get your impressions of Derek Carr, the quarterback, and then we'll get into the other parts. But just in your observations, and look, we saw him, and no one game defines anybody, but we saw him play against the Saints last season, and in that game, the Raiders were shut out. He threw for 101 yards, 1 interception. Was really frustrated by the Saints defense. I think in a way, it kind of synopsizes his career. There are flashes of brilliance, but there's a lot of inconsistency there too, in my mind, with Derek Carr.
I actually like Derek Carr. I'm not going to say I love Derek Carr, but I like him. I think he's a good fit for the Saints. I think he can come in with some leadership at the quarterback position, and he's still in his prime. I still feel like he's still in his prime. Pro Bowler quarterback, so it's not like they're getting a quarterback that's on the decline or that's on the way out of the league. So he's still playing good football. So I mean, even though he played against us and we held him to what we held him to, but we have a very good defense, and the things that we held him to, we just took away a lot of things that he did well. But I also feel like on the flip side of that, I think our coaching staff know the type of quarterback that he is, and he fits our system. That's why I'm honestly kind of happy they picked him up, because they seen him play. They played against him. They had to go against him. So they know exactly the ins and outs of things he's good at, the things he's not good at. And for them to see that and still want him lets me know that he must really fit this offense.
I don't think he's a bad quarterback either. I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I don't think he's an elite quarterback. I think he's a good quarterback. He's in that category to me, like with a guy like Kirk Cousins. You know what I mean? And Kirk Cousins has been successful in the regular season. Kirk Cousins has won 12, 13 games in the regular season and that. But my question is this, and I think my thought going into the offseason was the Saints last year was trying to see if they could continue something. They felt like the year before, you went through all these quarterbacks. We should have been in the playoffs if you had gotten decent quarterback play. And that it felt like at that time, that was the one thing that was missing. After last season, in my mind, I feel less inclined to believe that the Saints are a quarterback away, because now all of the players that were there a year ago are a year older, and the situation is a little bit different. It's like the Saints are caught in a weird place, and no football team wants to go backwards.
Right.
But are you moving the needle enough to get to a championship level? Because that's where the Saints have been trying to get to since that last Super Bowl. We've only had one NFC championship appearance since the Super Bowl victory. So the Saints have been been competitive and very competitive, but have not been able to get over the hump. I wonder if by making this commitment, it's not something against Derek Carr, but are you positioning yourself in the long term? And that's my thought is, for the long term, to really be a Super Bowl contender. Do you think you could get a short-term bump this year, maybe 1 or 2 years, but I look at the other things that the Saints structurally need, and that's where my question is.
That's a good way to think about it. And the way I'm thinking about it is, these last 2 years, we had, like I said, we missed the playoffs, but we've also had our quarterback injured. Our slated starter that came into the season that was starting ended up getting injured both seasons. And to me, I feel like that is where we struggled at the quarterback position. Not saying that, our fill-ins, our backups didn't do okay. Not saying that, but it's just different when you have that quarterback that is that is your starter, this quarterback that is win the quarterback battle competition during training camp, the guy that you're paying all this money, when you have that guy on your team, now everything just looks differently. I look back and I look at, okay, 2 years ago when Jameson got hurt and he was on his way to a Pro Bowl season before he got injured. If he would have stayed, if he didn't get hurt, and I say if he didn't get hurt, what would the Saints have done? I feel like the Saints would have been in a lot better position. Even this year just passed, he got injured. He didn't. Now he became healthy again, but he didn't get a starting job back. I feel like if I don't know what was in the water down there, but if he would have got his starting job back, I think things would have been different because his upside, he has way more upside, than his backup. So I feel like the same way with Carr. His upside is so much more that I feel like when you have that quarterback in place, that's not a backup, this team can go so much farther. But I do understand that they have other things they have to address as well because like everybody's getting older. But I still like the fact that you have a quarterback that you're riding on now. He's not injury prone, so you just don't know what can happen when you have a quarterback that is your guy and he's healthy the entire year. That's what I want to see.
What's interesting is that the fan base, a lot of folks, they compare this immediately to Drew Brees in that situation. I don't think those situations are alike at all because when Sean Payton took over and Drew Brees came in, Drew Brees was younger than what David Carr is now. And both Sean Payton and Drew Brees they had grace. You know what I'm saying? Like the Saints had bottomed out as a franchise. The fan base was upset. You're in the aftermath of Katrina, all these things that are going on. Just having a competent football team at that time would have been enough. And then that first year they go 10-6, but people forget those, it took Brees a little while to get his rhythm because he's coming off injury and all those things. So the expectations for Drew were not super high. Because you didn't know what he was. He had been a Pro Bowler in San Diego, but you didn't know what he was coming off that shoulder surgery. And the franchise was also injecting a lot of young life too. Reggie Bush comes in right at that time. You had established receivers, and Joe Horn was on that team when they first get there. You had veteran leadership in certain spots, and it was a younger defense because a lot of the core of that group, the Will Smiths and those kind of guys, the core of that Super Bowl team were young. This group is not that. This is a team that has been in contention for years and has had 2 years of mediocre play, primarily due to their lack of quarterback play, but has some other issues as well. Mike Thomas, his health status, the offensive line is in flux. You're going to likely have Alvin Kamara gone for at least 6 games this season, if not more, depending on what happens with his legal status. The defensive line has questions. It's older. Demario Davis, as good as he is on the latter stages of his career. You do have some very good young talent in spots. I love, Pete Werner. I think you have a lot of talent in the secondary at the cornerback spot. Your safeties, we know Tyrann Mathieu is getting a little older, but Marcus May is still relatively in his prime. But he didn't have a great year last year. He had a solid year, but not a great year. Maybe year 2 is better. I'm not going to say anything against that. But I don't feel the situations are similar. To me, the situation is more similar to a different quarterback in Saints history, Jim Everett. Jim Everett comes on to the Saints 1991. Just after the Saints had won their division championships, the Dome Patrol, all those things. That team had made its had a 12-3 season, had a couple, won a division title, and it was getting older. Jim Everett comes along and they thought they could extend that window with Jim Everett. He was a Pro Bowl quarterback, a guy who had some success in Los Angeles, but also had some very rough years in Los Angeles, but still put up decent numbers. Came in and for 2 years with the Saints, put up good numbers. He had like a 3,900 yard season with the Saints, his second year with the Saints. They went 7-9 his first 2 seasons, and then he kind of tailed off statistically after that. I don't say that that's going to happen with David Carr, but the situation, I think there are similarities there that you have an older Saints team bringing in a quarterback trying to extend something rather than what you had with Brees, where you were trying to build something.
Definitely. Like you said, it was totally different. Totally different. I just feel like we still have the pieces when you add him, because when I look at what we have in the key spots, the only key spot that I feel like, I'm not going to put it this way, every spot is a key spot.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as our offensive line is intact and we got a solid offensive line, I think we're going to be okay. But this is the reason why I feel this way. Because for one, you have a quarterback now with the old line to protect him. Even with Kamara, even if he got to miss 6 games, we still got a draft that's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And I still feel like we can grab a running back from the draft that can come in, maybe not be the same guy that Alvin is, but Alvin didn't do a lot. He didn't put a lot of numbers up last year, so he could come in and be efficient enough to make things happen. And if you get a kid like Keaton Mitchell from East Carolina, I'm throwing his name out there, I'm telling you, I've seen this guy play. He is the real deal. He's a smaller guy, but he can change the game like that. That's the type of guy that you could get in your system, into your program. I also look at the receivers that we have. Even though Thomas, we know his situation, but you still have other young receivers that has been making plays. Last year, we had a lot of young receivers that made plays for us. That experience is going to be huge for us moving forward for those guys. So the receiving core is going to be intact, even though you lost. The situation with Thomas is going on. And then when you look at your defensive backs, with Lattimore coming back, you have the young. What's the young
I
DB
like the corners. I do like the corners. I mean, Alontae Taylor.
Taylor. I like those guys.
Strength at that position. I think the corners for the first time, it feels like there's depth. You're not going into this draft thinking you have to add another corner.
Right. So now you can go into the draft and you can address other positions like the running back position. And you don't have to waste a high draft pick on a running back. You can find a running back, late, or a free agent running back. You can find a running back a dime a dozen. Not trying to minimize their position, but it's just a lot of them out there. So I feel like in the key positions that we need, I think we would be okay, because you got guys that can cover. You got receivers that can go get it. You have a quarterback that should be the guy that can throw every throw, that leadership in the locker room. And as long as you have an old line that is doing their job, that is protecting the quarterback, I feel like in key spots we have the youngness that we need moving forward. Even though we are getting older in certain places, I feel like even when it comes to the Honey Badger, I feel like his season, he didn't have a great year either last year. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of his came because we had to have a lot of time. We had 2 high safeties up top because we couldn't cover as well. He's not his best game is not him playing a high safety. It's him coming down into the box, making plays. But when you have your corners back, now he can kind of roam a little bit, and you don't have to play so high because he got to help out the corners because we're struggling. So I think just with the fact that we have these young quarters coming in, our safety play is going to be a lot better because they don't have to do as much because you have corners that can lock down on the outside. So even though we are getting older, I feel like in key positions, we are young enough to keep the ball rolling.
All right. And I'm only doing these things to be devil's advocate. People are going to say when they watch this that I'm being negative. But I'm just trying to be devil's advocate because I think all the questions should be asked, right?
Right.
Okay, let's I just want to go through the history of the last 12, 13 years of Super Bowl quarterbacks and the teams, how they got there. It is a pattern to me that you see is there's 2 quarterbacks that make the Super Bowl typically. Or there's either the quarterback who's been homegrown by his team and is on that first, second contract under the age of 30. Okay. And then the other one is the team that is poised to win a championship and adds that quarterback right then. They've got the elite pieces and then they've added the quarterback. So last year, it's Kansas City and Philly, right? 2 homegrown quarterbacks. The year before that, the Rams and the Bengals, Joe Burrow, homegrown, #1 pick. Matthew Stafford added to a team that had been to the Super Bowl, a former #1 pick, experienced guy, added to a team that was looking for consistency at the quarterback spot. Had all the other pieces, right? The Rams had. everything else. They just needed somebody better than Carson Wentz.
Right.
So, and we saw that Matthew Stafford kind of fell back to earth again this year for a number of reasons. They had injuries too and things in there. Year before, Tampa and Kansas City, again, homegrown versus Tom Brady being dropped into a situation with great talent around him, a defense that was already solid, wide receiving core that very talented, solid offensive line, good running backs, right?
Right.
Year before, Kansas City, San Francisco, 2 homegrown quarterbacks. New England and the Rams, the year before that, 2 homegrown quarterbacks. The year before that, Philly and New England, homegrown quarterbacks. Atlanta and New England, homegrown quarterbacks. Denver and Carolina, Peyton Manning added to a team that was already set to go, had the number 1 defense in the NFL against Cam Newton, homegrown quarterback. The year before that, Seattle, New England, Russell Wilson and Tom Brady, homegrown quarterbacks. The year before that, Colin Kaepernick versus Joe Flacco, 2 homegrown quarterbacks. The year before that, Eli Manning versus Tom Brady, homegrown quarterbacks. The year before that, Aaron Rodgers versus Ben Roethlisberger. The year before that, then you finally get to the Saints and the Colts. Peyton Manning, homegrown quarterback, picked up Drew Brees, young and like relatively young, and that's it, at 27, 28 when he comes in, and they developed to that point. It took 4 years for Brees to get to that Super Bowl point. The only one in recent history where you have a quarterback who kind of fell into a weird situation and that team got is Kurt Warner in Arizona. You have to go back to 2009 because Kurt Warner was a guy that at the time we thought he was washed by the time he got to Arizona, and he kind of rejuvenated himself there, certainly. But that's in the last 15 years, it's either homegrowns or guys who had done it somewhere, because we talk about Peyton and dropping it and all these guys, and Tom Brady dropping in. They're the only 2 who moved. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we've seen that. So when you look, so in that perspective, the historical perspective, that's another one of my concerns, is that historically in the NFL, when you pay for a veteran quarterback, it's usually for we're making the run right now. And it has to pay off then. If the Saints make this move, then it's on the front office. Like you said, they have to hit home runs in this draft, home runs in free agency, and not necessarily big time free agents but people who fill the roles that you need and the holes that you need to have filled. So the onus is on the front office to make this work then, because historically speaking, the odds would say it's going to be hard for the Saints to buck a trend that goes back now 15 years.
And I feel like with adding Carr to this team, I feel like we're in that mix of adding a quarterback to a team that is already kind of poised to keep the ball rolling. I feel like he's that quarterback that we're dropping into it, because before the season last year, we all felt like this was the year. This was the year we was going to get to the Super Bowl or make a deep run into the playoffs because of all the guys we had accoladed. But then you go and you get your quarterback hurt. Your quarterback is injured. Defense struggled a little bit. Defense struggled because offensively, offense struggled. We couldn't stay on the field. It was 3 and outs, 3 and outs. We couldn't stay on the field. We couldn't get anything going. So I feel like, and our defense still played solid. They wasn't great as they were 2 years ago, but I think they were still solid enough compared to where the offense had left them in. It was just tough for the defense to perform the way they perform when your offense is not playing comparable football. But now you drop Carr into it, I feel like now you have the receivers. You have the DBs. You got to get a running back in there.
Do you feel good about the front sevens the line play on both sides? Are you, because Ryan Ramczyk, we talk about 2 years in a row now, Ramczyk, I think, has played under his standard. And the injury certainly along the line, we know. Ruiz is still in development. Like I don't think we would say clearly, because the Saints did not have a dominant run game last year, that this is not a dominant front line. I think they do a decent job in pass protection, but they didn't do a great job, because otherwise maybe a quarterback is upright a little bit more. And this is a quick release. Derek Carr does have a quick release. I'm not going to take that away from him. Like it's but I think that line play is, these are the things that the front office has to make sure. It's if you're going to do this, because again, all those other quarterbacks too had some level of proven success. Even Kurt Warner had won a Super Bowl and had been to playoff games. Derek Carr has never won a playoff game. So it's a learning curve for him too. And that first year too, he's got to come in and he has to make this his locker room. Now, players are encouraged. They want you to. They're going to be receptive to him. He has to succeed in that. And I think that there's a lot of things. I am not negative in this, that I understand optimism. It's just that there are things, I think we have to make sure that fans understand that there's still work to be done. Having Derek Carr in and of itself does not guarantee anything. It is a clear upgrade from Andy Dalton, but there is work to be done in order to make this team not just a division winner, because I think that's a low bar in the NFC South right now. That's a low bar. If you really want to be a champion, that's what you're aspiring to be. There are still things that need to be done this offseason.
I think one thing that we all learned is never count your chickens before it hatch. And I think last year we was counting them, and then we counted them. I was one of them.
You and I both. I'm not gonna lie. We said we thought this was a double-digit win team.
Yeah, but you hit it right on the head. Work still has to be put in. You still have to go through training camp. You still have to grind. Each season is a different season. Just because you were successful last season or wasn't successful last season doesn't mean that's going to be the same outcome for you the following season. So you got to keep putting that work in. And like you said, it's a lot of work that still has to be done. But if you have a guy like Carr in the building, it just makes you feel better knowing that you do have a solid quarterback in place, because you're not going to win a Super Bowl if you don't have a solid quarterback. Not in the day and time now.
No, that's a guarantee. Yes, that's a guarantee. Yeah. You have to have a solid quarterback.
You have to have a solid quarterback. This is not the time when you have, and I'm not taking anything from Joe Flacco or anything like that, but Joe Flacco, when he was at Baltimore, when he was a manager, he was a game manager. That defense really was the staple point of that team.
And you're talking about not just a top 10 defense, a dynamic top 10 defense with Ed Reed, Hall of Famers on that defense, still in there at Ray Lewis at the back end, but that was you had Hall of Famers at that stage, a dominant type defense. And even with that game came down to the last play.
Right. So you got to have a quarterback now that can actually outscore and put some numbers up, because you have to face a team like a Kansas City or Bengals. Those teams can score. And so you got to be able to have a quarterback in place that can score with these guys. And I think bringing Carr in, I think that's it. Where else will we win? Who else will we? I mean, if we just looking at it, who else could we have went out and got, or somebody else in the draft? If you go to the draft and try to get a quarterback, that's to build the future. That's not for right now.
I think that's the other question is it's a question of the decision. I think there's a reasonable debate to be had as to whether or not, hey, is it advisable to say sign a quarterback that works as a bridge, and you're looking down the road and you're looking about the long-term future? I think this is there are merits behind both arguments. I think there are merits in signing your quarterback if you are going to make sure you do the other things that you need to make sure you support him, and those things fall into place. And there's also some merit in saying, okay, what are we looking at long-term? Because if the Saints had said this offseason, we are going to move Alvin Kamara, we are going to move Cam Jordan, we're going to start looking for some picks and getting some cap relief and retooling and get a younger team and do those things, I wouldn't have, if there was a plan, I would have been mad at that. If they do the things that they need to do to support Derek Carr and get all those things in place, I won't be mad at that. It's just I want to make sure. I think that's the question: is are you committed now? Because you can't just put him out there and say we've solved this problem. It's not solved until you give that man the pieces too. Because if we know he's a good but not elite, because elite is a hard place to get. He's good. Maybe you have to augment him with those right pieces. You better have that line ready. You better have that running game, because if you're forcing him to throw, if we're asking Derek Carr to throw 35 passes a game, you're going to be in the same situation we were when Drew Brees was throwing 35, 40. You can put up points, but you're gonna lose. You got to control that clock. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the things. It's much more on the front office now. I'm not going to blame Derek Carr if the Saints don't do well this season per se. I mean, unless he has like a terrible individual season. It's just the onus is really on Mickey Loomis to make sure that they draft well, and the onus is on that offensive staff to figure out like you understand Derek Carr's talents, okay, but for 2 years now you failed to utilize Alvin Kamara properly.
Mm-hmm.
So you better figure that out. And you've got these hidden gems, so you got to continue to develop Juwan Johnson. You got to continue to develop Chris Olave, make sure that he gets stronger, gets better at his deep routes, and doesn't drop a few balls like he had last year, had a couple drops. There's still the offensive staff still has some work to do too, because one of the things that I think we both agreed is that the Saints really didn't have an identity last season.
True.
And so that's on Dennis Allen now too. There's no excuses for him. You got last year to do your feeling out. Now assert yourself. Everything is yours. You got your quarterback now. You didn't want the quarterbacks you had before. You got your quarterback. Now you have to assert yourself too.
And I think all those things are true, but I also feel that the front management, I feel like the entire organization felt like they was one player away, and it's the quarterback position. That's how I feel. I also feel like they feel like the window may be closing as well in order to get to the Super Bowl before we got to start rebuilding. Because, like I said, we do have guys that's getting a little older. So I think they feel that window closing, but the window is still open. I think that's one reason why we got Carr and didn't go to the draft, because we still have a ton of talent on this team. But I want to see what we look like if we have a healthy starting quarterback the entire year. Because, like I said, we had the receivers, especially with the emergence of Saheed. So you still got three guys on that team that can really make plays for you, and they're young.
Get it to Shaheed. They can't be having these 2 touches. Get that man the ball.
Right. And then you go to the draft and you get a team and you get some guys in the draft that kind of fill some spots where you may be a little older. Fill those spots with some draft picks, but you're gonna have to get a running back. I don't know where you get him at in the draft. But and I keep saying it, I'm gonna say it because I've seen this guy in person. If you get a chance to get Keaton Mitchell, if you listening, really take note of that guy.
The Saints have had some successes with guys named Keith Mitchell in the past too.
I'm telling you, look, he runs like Jamal Charles. He's real slithery like Jamal Charles. But you put him in space, he's gone. You put him in space, he's gone. And he ran a 4.3 at the combine, but he runs a 4.3 all the time. Fourth quarter come, he's still running a 4.3. If you put on his game tape, he's breaking angles versus not just teams that can play, that can't play versus Cincinnati's, these big time schools. He's breaking angles and pulling away from guys. So he runs a 4.3 the entire game. That's what makes him different. So if you get a guy like that, it's just you have no idea what you can do with those guys. But I love Carr. I love the pickup. But I also feel like that the Saints feel like we're a quarterback away, but the window is closing. That's why you got to get a guy like Carr.
Yeah, it's got to happen within this contract. Because I don't think you do a second deal if you don't win a championship with Carr in these first in this 3 to 4 years. You don't do a second deal. Then that's when you definitely then have to decide to rebuild, because it doesn't make sense to put that money on top of it again. Because I think a lot of teams then do what the NFL is, this fear thing of it's so hard to find a quarterback, which it is, which is more about the league itself. It's so hard to find decent quarterback play. There's way more teams looking for a quarterback than have one. But you end up keeping a guy who doesn't raise your ceiling anymore, but you know what you've got, and you're overpaying for that. I think it's like, a Ryan Tannehill situation. Where Ryan Tannehill is good, but he doesn't raise the ceiling enough to make Tennessee great, to get them to the championship. How Buffalo is still trying to get Josh Allen over that hump development-wise. It takes, some guys don't get it, some guys do. And maybe for Derek Carr, it will hit now. Maybe it will. I'm not saying it won't. It's just that my thing is just temper the early expectations, because it's not going to come out the gate right. It's not going to be what it's going to be. By week 8, then we should know really.
Mm-hmm.
But if people think that the Saints going to come out the gate flying, let's be reasonable. Like you say, they got to go through training camp. They got players to sign. Nobody's taken a lick yet. All those things have to happen. So I think it's like, I know folks about, I've seen people going, we're going to win 14 next year. Slow it down. Slow it down. Let it play out. Excitement is cool. Optimism is cool. Let it play out, though. Because like you said, we counted those chickens last year. We were ready. I thought this was an 11-12 win team last year with quarterback play, but things happen. So other things do have to happen. But I do like, ultimately, the Saints are still navigating the cap well. They have to do well in this draft, and they have to fix that offensive line.
I agree with you.
One other guy, though, on as a free agent, Bruce Clark from the Chiefs, rush end, got released. Do you think that that's someone that the Saints should look at as a situational pass rusher? Because over the last 2 years now, the sack totals, ever since Hendrickson left in free agency for Cincinnati, especially the Saints are a team that relies on the D-line to provide that pressure. Is he somebody that the Saints maybe should look at as trying to bring in and get some pressure?
I think the Saints should look at any DN, that can play, that can get after the quarterback, because you got to have that guy. You got to have somebody that you don't have to scheme anything. Like, you can tell him to go and he gonna make a play for you. You got to have at least one of those guys on that D line that you don't have to scheme anything, because like some of our D linemen are getting a little older, So you got to have that guy. So for me, I'm looking at any DN out there, whether it's in the draft, whether it's through free agency. I'm looking for any DN that is one of those guys that we need. So looking at the guy from the Chiefs, yes, I'm interested. I want to see more of him. Let's watch him film and let's see if this guy is really worth bringing in the building. Do he fit our system? So I'm looking at all DNs, all pass rushers out there that can really get after the quarterback, not necessarily run stoppers. If they are run stoppers, you want them to be a run stopper and a pass rusher. But if you can find that elite pass rusher that can still hold his own in the run game, those are the guys you got to get after. Because you got to find it.
Lastly, before we jump, if you were prioritizing the needs now that quarterback is off the table, if you were prioritizing, how would you stack the 3 most important positions for the Saints to fill needs at this offseason?
Without the quarterback?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going O-line. I got to go O-line. I got to make sure my O-line is tight, because it don't matter what else you do. If you don't have an O-line, it don't even matter any other skill positions you have.
Because I think we still have a question at who's the left tackle for this team.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna go at the O-line first, make sure we're solid there. Then after that, I'm going to D-line. Then after that, I'm going to the running back position. So those are my 3.
I think so too. I think they've got, Trevor Penning was injured last year. You're hoping that he comes back and justifies being a first round pick. But he still would be a relative rookie at that spot. And I don't know if you want to have a rookie left tackle when you have just made this investment. You just made a $150 million investment. I don't know if a rookie left tackle is that. So you've got to find someone who's going to be capable of manning that spot and who's going to be dependable with, not going to miss 10, 11 games. And I think they have a big decision to make on Andrews Pete. This offseason on Andrews Pete, I think he may be one of those July 1 casualties, just because you cannot count on him. So I think that offensive line question is the thing. But it's going to look, no matter what, it just got a lot more interesting in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm. It did.
It just got.
It's good. It's good. Interesting. It's good.
Yes.
Interesting thing. It's good. So. Like I said, I'm excited about the season, but I will not give any predictions of what we're gonna do. Like I said, I'm gonna wait it out, and
we gotta see a lot of stuff. Like I said, it's a long off season to go. Like I said, the draft, mini camps, training camps, all these things to see, and but yeah, there is. It's moving forward, because you could not go into next year. That was one thing for certain. Could not go into next year with Andy Dalton as a starter. That wouldn't go ahead.
No, nope.
Brother, any final words before we get out of here?
Man, not at all, man. It's good talking to you, man, and also talking Saints football. Look, go Saints.
Absolutely. So we'll be back. We'll do this again as we probably get closer to the draft. He is Terrence Copper.